Hey, welcome back everybody. Today's objectives are to identify, name, and draw ether molecules and to recognize and predict products for two organic reactions that ether molecules undergo.
Before we get started, we got to lay out two important points on ethers that'll help you understand some things. First of all, what are they? It's a special class of organic compound, a different functional group. It has an oxygen single bonded to two separate carbon atoms or carbon groups. The general formula will give you a better idea of what this looks like. Oxygen in the middle, one carbon chain on the left, different carbon chain on the right.
We went over alcohols and the different classes of alcohols, primary, secondary, tertiary. We're going to do the same thing for ethers. Uh, if you look at the carbon that is connected to the oxygen, and usually we look at the longest chain, we'll show you some examples of those type of ethers, but in all three of these cases they're the same on both sides, so you could really just pick a side. This one, there's only one carbon chain, and then there's going to be two hydrogens coming off of there. Therefore we have a primary ether. Here we have two carbon chains coming off of the central carbon, so it's a secondary. And tertiary is when there's three carbon chains coming off the centralized carbon.
Here's an example of how this process would work. If we gave you this ether and asked you if it was primary, secondary, or tertiary, first thing you do is isolate the carbons on each side bonded to the oxygen. Next thing you do is count how many carbon atoms are attached to those carbon atoms. Over here on the left side, there's only one carbon coming off, so the left side would be primary. On the right-hand side, however, there's two other carbon groups attached, so we would call it the right-hand side secondary.
Alright, so let's go over the naming rules for ethers. We're going to find the longest continuous chain. Please note that we have two different examples. Down here, this one has the same number of carbons on both sides. This is with ether that has different numbers of carbons on either side. Either way, we want to find the longest continuous chain extending from the oxygen on each side and number the carbons at that oxygen. So here we have 1, 2, here we have 1, 2, so either way it's going to be F. Over here we have meth, and this side we have F. We're going to assign names and numbers to the attached groups. The shorter of the two halves gets the oxy. We don't have any attached groups to either side here, and they're both the same length, so we're just going to make one of them the oxy. So the shorter of the two usually get the oxy, but in the case that you have the same number of carbons, you can just pick which one. So this is ethoxy, and then we have to put our ending, which we'll get to in a second. On the other side over here on the second example, we have methoxy. And then let's go ahead and add our endings of the side that's longer. We have ethane, so this one is ethoxyethane, and this one will be methoxyethane. Alright, so arrange the name so it's closer together. Final product, ethoxyethane, this one methoxyethane.
Alright, here's a second example. First thing you do, longest continuous chain on either side. You also want to number those chains. Third thing you want to do is deal with any attached groups. We have a methyl coming off right here, and it's on carbon 3 of that particular side chain, so it's a 3-methyl. The shorter side of the two sides gets the oxy ending here, so the two carbons down here are called ethoxy. These 4 carbons are called butane, ane, because they're all single bonds. Lastly is to assemble the name. The ethoxy always goes first out front. The backbone, the longer chain, always goes last. And notice where we put that 3-methyl, because the 3-methyl is attached to the butane, you have to list the 3-methyl directly in front of the butane, and the ethoxy goes first.
Let's take a look at another ether. We're going to number the backbone. Notice the right side has the larger backbone than the left. We're going to identify any of the substituent groups coming off. We have a 1-methyl off of the shorter chain, and we have a 3-methyl off of the larger chain. The shorter of the two chains gets the oxy ending, so we have ethoxy. On the right side gets the root ending, which is butane. So now we have to assemble it in the order in which you see it, starting with the shortest chain. So we have 1-methyl, ethoxy. And on the right side, we have to name the substituent group first, 3-methyl, and it gets the root ending butane. 1-methyl ethoxy, 3-methyl butane.
Okay, another example. This time you can see obviously there's a double bond located on these chains. That's going to complicate things a little bit. The rules pretty much stay the same. Find the longest chains on either side and number those chains. The shorter side is oxy, so we have an ethoxy on the left. The longer side is named as the parent chain with the proper ending. Notice it's a but for the 4 carbons. This time it's not butane, it's butene, because we have a double bond, and also a number is there for the first time. The number has to indicate where the double bond is located after carbon 2, hence 2-butene. Put the whole name together and you get ethoxy 2-butene.
Alright, so there's another thing that we need to take into consideration when naming ethers, and that's the naming of epoxies. Notice that an epoxy is a special type of ether when it's that has its own set of naming rules. All that epoxy is an oxygen that's connected to 2 carbons within the chain. So the first rule is to find the longest chain with the epoxy attached, number that. So we're going to number left to right because the oxygen is attached earlier on the left side. And the third thing is to name the backbone with ane, ene, or ine. Since we have all single bonds, it will be an alkane ending. So we have hexane. And then we have to number where the epoxy is, both carbons that it comes off of. So since it's attached to the second and third carbon, it would be 2,3-epoxy. So our final name is 2,3-epoxy hexane.
Alright, so now we can get into some reactions. What you're going to see first is an ether formation reaction. This is the process by which ethers are made and produced. It's a dehydration reaction, which you saw before in the alcohols tutorial. A dehydration is any reaction where water is removed from the reactant, so you're going to see that happen again. Also notice this requires 2 alcohol molecules for the reaction to take place. Let's look at how it works. First thing that happens is the water molecule is removed and formed by taking an OH from one molecule. I have the OH coming from the alcohol on the right, and the hydrogen from the other molecule. I have the hydrogen coming from the alcohol on the left. That of course produces an H2O, so water is going to be one of your products for this reaction. What really happens here is this removal of the water causes the 2 chains to attach to each other where those hydroxyl groups used to be with an oxygen. This oxygen right here sort of still left behind. Your product of this is of course an ether where the 2 chains become attached and the little oxygen guy is left behind at the middle.
Our next reaction is the ether cleavage, and cleavage just means that it could be broken apart. So we have our ether here and we have our acid right here. The acid's going to break apart and this covalent bond is going to get broken. The ether is going to come over with this carbon chain along with the hydrogen from the acid, and it's going to make an alcohol. The other side is going to be a halide because the iodine is going to attach to the other side. So ether cleavage, if you see that, it's just the ether being broken down into an alcohol.
Okay, so finally we have some things in everyday life where you'll find ethers. If you've ever used an aerosol spray can for pretty much anything before, there was a dimethyl ether inside of there that was used to propel that substance out of the can. Notice the naming for this is a little different than what we did. This is known as the common naming system. By our rules, the IUPAC system, we would have called this guy methoxymethane. Another example is diethyl ether, what we would have called ethoxyethane. Back in the 1800s, they used to use this stuff as an anesthetic, but eventually stopped when they found better stuff because it was flammable and it made you pretty sick when you woke up from the stuff. Lastly, is a special compound called anisole. If you've ever smelled black licorice before, it's very likely that what you were smelling was due to this molecule right here, which is an ether, a benzene on one side, and a methyl on the other.
J. Rocket just informed me to bring it home, so we're going to do that by looking at the objectives. We drew some ethers. Remember, we have our regular common ethers, where we just add oxy to the shorter chain, like methoxyethane. We have our epoxies, where we have an oxygen that is connected to 2 carbons on the longest chain. We just add epoxy to the front of that, and also we identify it by what numbers it's attached to the carbon. And then we looked at some reactions with ethers. One is a dehydration reaction that forms an ether. The other one breaks down an ether into an alcohol. If you have any questions, please bring it to class.